The strategic confrontation between the United States and Russia has entered an irreversible, financially devastating phase. The critical new development is Donald Trump's unequivocal public support for a legislative measure that is, in effect, a fiscal nuclear strike designed to sever Russia's last remaining financial lifelines. This is not mere rhetoric. It is the calculated weaponization of global trade. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare, global affairs, and U.S. domestic politics. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The core of this new pressure is the 500% tariff threat. Trump has publicly backed a bipartisan Senate bill that would allow him to impose duties of up to 500% on imports from countries that continue to buy Russian energy oil, gas, and uranium without actively supporting Ukraine. This aggressive endorsement is significant because, while the president already possesses considerable power to levy tariffs, this public commitment escalates the threat to an unprecedented and non-negotiable political level. It signals a complete end to the political ambiguity that Moscow previously exploited. The strategic target of this fiscal weapon is clear: China and India, the two indispensable nations that became the primary consumers of discounted Russian crude after the European market closed. The application of a 500% tariff on goods imported from these countries would instantly render trade with the United States commercially impossible. Beijing and New Delhi would be forced into an immediate, irreversible choice: cease all purchases of Russian energy or face the complete destruction of their access to the U.S. consumer market. The economic consequence of losing the U.S. consumer base is exponentially greater than the benefit of discounted Russian oil. The strategic meaning of this ultimatum is devastating for Vladimir Putin. His entire war budget is reliant on the revenue generated by these energy exports. By supporting this measure, Trump is delivering the strongest possible signal that the U.S. is prepared to functionally blockade Russia's remaining revenue streams. The effect is a guaranteed financial bleed-out. Once the tariffs are imposed, Russia will lose the primary source of hard currency needed to finance its military operations, forcing a massive contraction in its ability to prosecute the war. This is the ultimate form of coercion, using economic power to dictate the military outcome.
We have established the political intent behind the aggressive new tariffs. Now we confront the immediate, devastating economic reality. The recently implemented sanctions by the Trump administration against Rosneft and Lukoil have delivered a shattering blow to the core of Russia's financial stability. These restrictions are not merely symbolic. They are a direct attack on the entire production vertical of the nation's oil industry, immediately severing the revenue streams that finance the war. The scale of this financial assault is critical. Rosneft and Lukoil are not minor players. They represent the heart of Russian oil power, collectively responsible for an overwhelming portion of the nation's total crude production. By targeting these two entities, along with the other sanctioned majors, the U.S. has effectively placed 3/4 of all Russian oil exports under immediate financial blockade. This means that a significant portion of Russia's foreign currency earnings, which directly fuel the massive war budget, is now vulnerable. The mechanism of this financial blockade is ruthlessly effective and targets the vulnerabilities of global commerce. These sanctions immediately deny the targeted companies access to the U.S. dollar system. This is a profound problem, because even though Russia sells its oil to India and China for payment in local currencies, yuan or rupees, the underlying international banking transactions, insurance, and financing often still touch the U.S. financial infrastructure. The Treasury Department's action immediately forces banks across Asia and the Middle East to make an existential choice: continue processing payments for sanctioned Russian oil and risk being cut off entirely from the dollar and global financial system, or comply with U.S. sanctions. The result has been immediate and devastating. Major Indian and Chinese buyers are rapidly reducing or halting their purchases of Russian crude. This compliance is driven by fear, not loyalty. Indian refineries, who had become the single largest buyer of discounted Russian oil, are now preparing for massive reductions, citing the legal and financial risks associated with the sanctions. Similarly, key Chinese state-owned and independent oil companies have paused new negotiations, waiting for clarification on how to avoid crippling secondary sanctions. This collective global self-sanctioning, orchestrated by the U.S., guarantees a sharp, immediate drop in Russia's oil and gas revenues. This rapid collapse in revenue is the ultimate strategic victory. Russia's federal budget is already struggling with a massive deficit fueled by the unsustainable costs of the war. The loss of stable, hard currency from these key Asian markets accelerates the state's march toward insolvency. The Kremlin is now trapped. Its ability to finance its military, replenish its equipment, and sustain its domestic budget is being systematically dismantled by an external financial force, proving that the war of attrition is now unwinnable. We have analyzed the immediate financial assault on Russia's economic lifeline. Now, we confront the most direct and potent military consequence of the Kremlin's arrogance: the strategic decision by the U.S. administration to weaponize intelligence, effectively burning the red line that previously protected Russia's strategic assets. This was a move of pure retribution, turning American reconnaissance power into a direct engine of Ukrainian offensive capability. The core reason for this policy pivot was simple: Trump's personal fury over being deceived. For 2 years, the U.S. withheld crucial intelligence and specific weaponry, adhering to a politically cautious policy that restricted Ukraine from striking sensitive targets deep within Russia. This created a massive strategic sanctuary for Russia, allowing the military to safely position its logistics, command posts, and energy infrastructure far from the front line. The Kremlin's failure to reciprocate this diplomatic restraint, compounded by Putin's arrogance in rejecting a peace deal, was interpreted by Trump as a personal affront that demanded immediate non-military punishment. The strategic consequence was the lifting of the political restrictions. The U.S. has sanctioned the transfer of highly detailed reconnaissance data to Kyiv for the explicit purpose of enabling deep strikes. This is not basic satellite imagery. It is granular, actionable intelligence that provides a real-time picture of the Russian air defense grid. American surveillance capabilities allow Ukrainian military planners to optimize their drone and missile flight paths, guiding them around the weakest points of Russian radar coverage and ensuring a much higher rate of successful penetration. This relentless exposure of Russian defense vulnerabilities is the strategic cost of the Kremlin's arrogance. This capability is the linchpin of the economic war, the kinetic sanctions campaign. The U.S. is actively enabling Ukraine to systematically hit and damage Russia's most vulnerable assets, oil refineries and thermal power plants. The subsequent wave of Ukrainian strikes that caused massive domestic fuel shortages is a direct, measurable result of this U.S.-enabled targeting. This attack on the energy sector is not merely about diminishing supply. It is about imposing a proportional economic cost on the aggressor. The critical conclusion is that the removal of this political constraint has permanently altered the strategic balance. The Kremlin must now divert massive, scarce air defense assets, the S-400s and Buk units, away from the front lines to defend static industrial targets hundreds of kilometers away. This defensive dispersal creates a no-win scenario. Russia must choose between defending its vital industrial hubs and sustaining its ground forces on the front line.
This military and financial self-cannibalization ensures that the frontline army, already depleted and struggling, will be placed under even greater strain. The era of Russia's strategic sanctuary is over, replaced by a new reality where the cost of aggression is measured in the destruction of the Russian homeland.
We have analyzed the failure of diplomacy and the financial strangulation tactics. Now, we confront the external geopolitical strategy that guarantees the end of Russia's war financing. Donald Trump is actively and methodically seeking to dismantle Russia's remaining oil markets by preparing to release vast new supplies of oil onto the global stage. This is a direct, calculated move to eliminate the last pillars of Putin's economy. The logic behind this strategy is a masterclass in market coercion. Putin relies on the continued tightness of the global oil supply to maintain high prices and justify the price he charges his remaining customers, primarily India and China. Trump's plan is designed to directly attack this market dependency by bringing two major, currently sanctioned producers, Iran and Venezuela, back into the global supply equation. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves, and Iran, which is capable of instantly injecting massive volumes of crude, represent the ultimate financial threat to Moscow. The strategy involves active, high-level diplomatic engagement. Trump's administration is holding complex, high-stakes negotiations with both Iran and Venezuela. The goal is to secure political concessions, such as an end to military aid to Russia, or political stabilization, in exchange for lifting crucial oil sanctions. If these negotiations succeed, the resulting flood of cheap, unsanctioned Venezuelan and Iranian crude would instantly crash global oil prices and fundamentally destroy Russia's pricing power. The consequence for Putin's budget would be immediate and irreversible. The new, abundant oil supply would eliminate any justification for India and China to continue purchasing Russian crude at premium rates. These countries, which are driven by pragmatic commercial interest, would swiftly pivot to the cheaper unsanctioned supply. The result is a guaranteed market checkmate. Russia would lose its last two major customers, severing the financial arteries that supply the war effort. The money necessary to pay soldiers, replace equipment, and sustain the state budget would simply vanish. Furthermore, this geopolitical action is amplified by the internal financial pressure. The U.S. has already imposed crippling sanctions on Russia's major oil exporters, driving them to use the vulnerable shadow fleet and incur massive transportation costs. The successful introduction of alternative suppliers into the market would ensure that the financial pressure becomes total. Russia would have no viable option but to cut production, as its oil would become too expensive to transport and too difficult to sell. This complete systemic loss of its primary revenue stream guarantees that the continuation of the war is financially impossible. The war will end because the Kremlin will be driven to a point of critical insolvency. Trump's strategy, rooted in a clear understanding of global energy dynamics, ensures that the external pressures align perfectly with the internal financial collapse, leaving Putin with no political or economic leverage to sustain the conflict.
We have meticulously analyzed the confluence of external pressure, military threat, and internal economic decay that defines this conflict. The final, unavoidable conclusion is that the entire war is now entering its decisive phase. Because Vladimir Putin's fundamental strategy, the belief that he could outlast the West's political will, has spectacularly failed. The only path to peace runs directly through a massive, consolidated application of pressure. For force is the only language that the Kremlin respects. The Russian leader is trapped in an inescapable strategic dilemma, a position entirely of his own making. His war of attrition was predicated on the fragmentation of the Democratic Alliance and the eventual collapse of financial support for Ukraine. Instead, his aggression has triggered the exact opposite response. The financial and military instruments of the West have been mobilized with a singular, relentless focus. The continuous, crippling sanctions on major oil companies, the maritime blockade of the shadow fleet, and the intense political pressure exerted on remaining customers like India are systematically severing the revenue streams that finance the war. This financial chokehold confirms that the war is economically unsustainable. This financial suffocation is amplified by a clear, credible military ultimatum. The US has eliminated the political red line that previously protected Russian assets. The open discussion regarding the transfer of weapons like the Tomahawk cruise missile is the ultimate expression of this power. This threat forces Putin to divert scarce air defense assets away from the front lines to defend industrial targets deep within Russia, compromising his viability on both the military and economic fronts. This military pressure is not designed to invite dialogue. It is designed to compel surrender. The Russian leader must now look at his crumbling financial base and his strategically exposed heartland and realize that the costs of fighting are escalating to an existential level. The ultimate failure of Putin's strategy is that he has provided the democratic world with the absolute moral clarity required to act decisively. The West must now fully embrace this strategy of consolidated force. This means ending any further speculation about soft compromise and continuing to apply the overwhelming pressure that has brought the Kremlin to the brink. The only viable path to peace is to prove definitively and irrevocably that the continuation of the war guarantees the total economic ruin of the Russian state. The end of the conflict will be dictated by Ukraine's terms because the only currency left that matters is strength.